Welcome to the Medical Support to Irregular Warfare podcast, an initiative to discuss and educate the evolution of medical support in peace, security, and conflict in uncommon environments. Points, perspectives, and opinions voiced here are solely those of the contributors and do not represent any formal association or government entity. We do everything possible to ensure the information and discussion is sound, comprehensive, and from the most credible sources.
Welcome back to the MSIW podcast. This is Dennis, and we got Paul and Missy. How are you guys doing today?
Great. Thanks, Dennis.
Wonderful. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So, the topic today is we're going to talk about Missy's new book, Laypersons Guide for Prolonged Casualty Care. I guess, why do we need another book?
Jump right in, Dennis.
Yeah, I'll go right in. Well, I'll get to the backstory of this, but like if you go searching for books, there's a couple online. Like if you just do a quick book search, there's a couple online, but they get after a lot more first aid, a lot more just text that's just word heavy and doesn't have, hey, here's step 1, 2, 3. And then there really, is there a unified effort across multiple populations? I don't think so. And so was trying to think of that when the book was developed of, hey, how do we even share this beyond our communities into other communities? And so I think that's what was needed and tried to address that.
Yeah. Were there other books that you looked at or other publications out there prior to your publication?
Yeah, I started this and then actually midway I was like, "Oh, is there anything already out this? Am I just duplicating it?" And I did quite a bit of searching, and there's like some preppers guides to survival medicine, survival medicine handbook, those kind of things. And they're good. They have good information. They just aren't exactly this gap of what do I do once I've stabilized a trauma patient and then now I'm stuck with them. And that's really what this focused on is, traumatic injury in the setting of conflict, disaster. And then how do I keep going once I've done immediate life-saving actions?
Oh, perfect. Before we go any further, do you want to introduce yourself, new to the podcast somewhat, and just tell the listeners who you are, where you came from, and how you got to this point, what you're doing these days?
Yeah, well, hi, I'm Missy Givens. I'm a ER doctor by trade. I am 100% product of United States government funded education, academy grad, uniformed services university grad, did all my residency and fellowship training through the government. And so definitely have a strong sense of feeling I need to pay that back in as many ways as I can. And much of my career was spent mixing between the operational world and academics, and that's kind of my passion is bringing an academic bent to trying to translate things that are relevant operationally, and I really love getting things down to the user that really is the least equipped but often faced with the hardest problems, and that is kind of defined the last decade of my career of trying to get after that problem set.
Sure. Perfect. Yeah, and for everybody else who doesn't know me, I'm a retired SF medic, Paul Los, and I've been working with Dennis for a long time. I'm usually behind the scenes in the website these days, but he's the one that's pushing this podcast ahead. And the whole reason that we're doing this is the medical support to irregular warfare group out of the Special Operations Medical Association wanted to kind of change the direction of the way they're communicating. We've tried some other things before where we had live streams and we had our meetings at Soma, and they're super successful, but it's very limited to the audience that you can reach. So I think bringing that to this platform to the existing listeners who are probably interested in this topic anyway is a good way to do that, and then to branch off eventually at some point. So yeah, thanks, Dennis, for having us here. I know it's kind of a weird overlap of two different subjects, but this is perfect because prolonged casualty care for a layperson in the medical support to regular warfares, both of the podcasts. I think this is a good way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like it's something that's absolutely needed. Like, you're right, Missy. There is a plethora of survival manuals that will tell you sometimes good stuff, sometimes not so good stuff, to do in a survival situation, an accident, etc. Um, which I guess is another question for you is you can tell some of these books are like ultra safe, like put a dressing on it or pack clothes on top of it and tie it kind of tight or use sticks to splint fractures, and that can be kind of helpful, but it's not going to save somebody's life, that's for sure. um, you know I guess why did you feel the need that, hey, we're going to go like in depth, I'm going to explain something that's actually pretty complex to somebody who has little to no medical knowledge on how to do this properly, and like how did you break it down to a base level?
Yeah, well, I think we need to go back in history to where this comes from, and it's in the front of the book of, this all started with all the people that came up with PFC, and I don't want to miss anybody, so I'm not going to name people
Such a long
specifically.
list of names. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but Paul, you being one of them, of like this was a problem set that people started working on, and you know it's been years, it's been a decade since that all started and refined. How do we approach this? What do we say? What is the evidence? But what's interesting when you get into lay person terms, there's actually very little evidence for a lot of the things that the layperson could do. So it's trying to find that balance between what we as medical professionals say is best practice based on the science, and then, okay, well, now what can I pick and pull out of that for the layperson without hurting anybody? And we kind of have the benefit of learning some things over the past decade. So I kind of picked at that. But then it really was, I have to give credit to both my editor and illustrator. Carol Stockton was the editor of this book. She literally would take everything we wrote and she'd sit in her house and go, I'm not medical. Can I do this? And then she'd force me to keep editing until, she is somebody who's never seen any of this stuff, was able to do it. And that's really where this value comes is it has to be, you know, accessible by the person who never did it. And that's hard for medical people to write at that level. It's really challenging. And then Christy Minnick's the one who did the illustrations, and same thing. She's like, if I don't know why we're doing this picture or what is supposed to get out of it, we're not going to put it in the book, and she spent hours and hours refining things to make sure you could see details that were important. So a lot of credit to the folks that put the book together. And then I used med students as authors because I thought they were maybe closer to not knowing the material and would bring that kind of fresh look to it. And then they had mentors who were, senior people with medical experience. And so really tried to use that, chain that would exist in the reality of the situation of hey, there's people that have never seen this before, all the way up to people that have expertise in the area.
Do you remember any of those things that jumped out at Carol, when she was trying some of the stuff that we had written down previously or that you thought would work, but she was like, I don't know.
Absolutely. And I think, we've learned this of just simple things like putting on a tourniquet. That seems so easy and so straightforward. But we probably spent an hour on the phone talking through, hey, this word goes here, this word doesn't go there. Cause she's always asking okay, I did that. Well, now what? Now exactly what, and it just was really an interesting experience for me. We struggled a lot with medications, because when you're trying to simplify that down, and pick and choose, you can't choose them all. You have to pick a subset. How are you going to present that? And there's some risk there, right? As a medical professional, I'm telling people to take medications without the advice of a licensed provider. And so we had to work through that risk calculus of, do we want to include this? what can we include? Is it safe to include it? And wound care was the other piece of that, of it seems intuitive, but it's not. And you have to go, when do I take the dressing off? Is if it's still bleeding or if it's just got pus in it, how does that change my calculus? And these are things that as a medical professional, you really don't think about anymore. And you have to go back and break it down of what is going on in my mind when I make these decisions.
Yeah, I hate to jump really far forward, but I know that you also have this translated into several other languages. And how does that affect the medications that were in there? Because some of them you don't find in other countries.
Yeah, so we started with the English version because we needed a base, and the vision was always of at least have the language, so the language will translate. They will probably need to adapt, medications that are available. We stuck to generics, and then we talked about drug classes, so that you could pick within a drug class. But for a layperson, that would be tough. But I think that's searchable, right? If you do have, internet access, somebody could search to go, hey, is this in the same drug class? So we tried to address it that way. But here's the deal. This is I consider this the 1% of the beginning of this project. I think, podcasts like this are great because then it can pull in other people that bring a different perspective and go, hey, in future translations, consider this. Or when we translate for this language group or this culture group, these are the things we need to adapt because it is very US centric, based on what's FDA approved here. And that will need to be adjusted when we look at translations. The translation we did was in an effort to support a specific training that was going on. So it was kind of rushed. It's probably a 80% solution, but at least now somebody can pick it up and run with it. And that's something I want to mention. We spent a long time with our legal team to do the copyright so that the copyright says you can take this and you can reproduce it and you can adapt it, and use it for your own purposes. And you don't need permission to do that. As long as you're not charging money for it, you can take this product and make it what you need to be, because I knew I can only get at one slice, and I wanted, the copyright to address that. Please, please, please take this product, make it better, create other versions, and, being able to talk to a broader audience to offer that, I think is really important.
Yeah, no, I agree. And especially when you get an 80% solution out there, there is no better way to get participation from people when they start reading something and like, oh, now I need to add this or this should be changed. And then they come at you. So that's a great idea. I like it. What were you going to say, Dennis?
So I guess was the intent that is this going to be like a standalone? I wouldn't say medical education, but is this meant to be a standalone? Is this meant to be, um, you have somebody that's sick? Hey, these are kind of like when you discharge a patient from the ED. At the very bottom of all that paperwork is patient education, family education, so that they can take care of their loved one when they leave the hospital. Is this meant to be an organized version of that, or is this meant to be like a standalone? Like there is nobody else. It's you in this book.
Yeah, it was originally designed as you in this book, with the vision of in the IW space of I'm in my basement and I can't leave my basement, and
Hmm.
I have, friends, loved ones, strangers who, have had, have survived that initial, death threat, but have traumatic injuries. And now what do I do? And it's really written with that thought of I'm doing this inside a place that is not a medical facility that might not have medical supplies. And so we spent a good amount of time in the early chapters talking about, hey, how do you prepare your home for that? How do you prepare your, if it's maybe your workplace where you might want to prepare of like, what do I need to think about? So it's really, that's really what it was targeted for, was somebody who is cut off from the rest of the world, if to kind of use a really broad term. and to give them a, basically a friend by their side with a hand on their back to go, you can do this, and then here's where you start. Um, and but I think, the question is, hey, do we just hand out this book and we're done? No, I don't think it'll work that way. The vision I see in my head is, this book is the start of a conversation, and you can take whatever your community or your team is and take a look at the book. And if we're talking about lay people, it would be impossible to say you can do everything in this book. But what you could do is you could say, hey, your area of expertise is going to be, nutrition and hydration. And that's in this chapter, and your area is going to be wound care, and you're going to learn what you can about wound care, which is in this chapter. And then you person are going to be the one who, like, he tries to stockpile medications, has looked at that list, kind of understands what we need, and how to keep track of that. Maybe somebody else is like the vital signs person, like you master taking vital signs. And so if I was responsible, like, I just take my friends and family, I live in a really tight knit community. I like to share with them and go, hey, what are your skills, and how can this book link to, skills of various people that I'm surrounded by, so that I'm prepared. And then, just like a good team, people will cross train and share what they know with others. And, that's kind of the vision of how this would work. So I think handing out the book's the first step, because you got to be familiar that there's even a problem and that you could even respond. But then I think it does take some, small leadership to go, well, who's on my team? Who's on my zombie apocalypse team? And what are they capable of? And can I divide this down into digestible bites, so that, we can work together? And I think when you get after, a layperson or even somebody with medical skills that hasn't touched them in a long time, I actually really think the book would be really good for those people of, like, hey, I used to know some medical stuff, but I haven't been doing it in a long time. The book would be great for that type of person. And we
Yeah.
actually changed the title. So the copy you had was one of the early bootleg copies. We changed it to Practical Guide to Prolonged Casualty Care, because we figured it won't always be the layperson. It might be somebody with medical skills that are just not right now current for whatever reasons.
Yeah, that's what I
Okay.
was going to say. If you have somebody who was a CNA working in a hospital, working in a basement in a bomb shelter or something is probably a little different once they actually get their hands on not having a nurse, not having a doctor or somebody with them. So, yeah, that's a great idea.
Does this book focus on trauma, or does this cover the gamut? Because non-war injuries are probably a bit more common.
Yeah, I would love to cover it all, but it would be multiple volumes. So we did. We narrowed it down to trauma, and then there is, the sequelae of trauma. So we spent a decent amount of time on wounds and, sepsis, and how to deal with that. Understanding of, hey, what will that survival curve look like for patients that have survived the initial trauma, but then I'm stuck with them for 2 or 3 days. So we tried to address the non-trauma piece of it through sepsis and wound care. But it does not get into first aid. I think we touched briefly on anaphylaxis, because you're going to give medications and we're putting people at risk. So we wanted to make sure that was included. We do include nutrition, hydration, those kind of things, but I don't get into, like infectious disease, like how do you prevent spread of, um, cholera. I don't get into things like that.
Okay. But wound care, did you get into like honey dressings, maggot therapy? Like, I mean, there's a gamut of things that are out there. Dakin solution.
We
Um,
did. So we spent time basically breaking down different kinds of dressings, and then kind of describing what they do, so that if you need to, like, improvise with, whatever material you have, you can try and do that. We did talk about using honey in wounds. We did not get into maggots because I'm like I don't know that I have maggots in my basement, so I probably not going to be able to find them. We did talk. We do have recipes for wound irrigation solutions. We have recipes for oral rehydration, salts, so that you can do these things. And this is where I think, looking at this, helping people understand of like, hey, look at this ahead of time and realize you can do this. Of like, I can keep a casualty, hydrated. I do have salt and sugar in my house. I can make Dakin solution. I have some bleach in my pantry and I, can do these things. And that is even if people don't read the details of the book, if we can use the book to help people believe they can do things and open their eyes to that, because I think we're especially in the United States, we are so medical legally constrained that it's hard to take our brain to what we can do because we're kind of always told not to do that. It's not in our lane. And so I want to use the book to start that conversation of, well, how do we practice these things? And I'll share with you guys. So I actually live on a boat, and I love living on my boat because it forces me on a daily basis to think about how much water am I using. I only have 50 amps of electricity, so I have to be very conscious of what I turn on and turn off and do all those things, and I'm in the middle of a city on a boat, so it's not hard for me to get supplies and that kind of stuff, but I only have so much room. So I have to make decisions about what do I keep, what do I store. I don't have infinite space. And I would encourage people, like with whatever their lifestyle is to practice that drill sometimes, of like, what do I use? What else can I substitute for that? Where do I get it from? And incorporate these, what drills into your life on a daily basis so that when you are faced with the challenging, that, mental pathway is accessible. I think it's called alternate use tasking is the,
Mhm.
how the literature describes it.
Yeah, and when you translate that over to the medical support to irregular warfare space, it seems like that's a great first step for people to get involved in their community and preparedness and security. Because a lot of people, they have a feeling where maybe it's the government or the system or somebody should be taking care of me. But I think opening their eyes to what you can do for yourself and your family, your neighbors, like that opens a whole new world once you have that little nudge or that push, you feel enabled or empowered. So I think it's pretty powerful starting out with medicine because it's such a low risk thing, what we're talking about here as far as fighting a war. Let's first look at how we can take care of each other, and then you can get into that other stuff.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, I think at least definitely Western societies, it's, the medical providers are the one authorized to give that kind of advice and tell you what to do and do those things for you. It can be kind of a leap uh, to empower somebody who doesn't have any knowledge. Hopefully, they actually read through the book before something happens, so you can at least tab the things that you have to move quick on. Um, with anything, especially when you're dealing with trauma, there are things that have to happen quickly, and things that you can take time on. I guess how did you differentiate one from the other in a manual?
Yeah, so I made the conscious decision, and this is tough, right? This is where we're not used to this decision calculus. I made the very deliberate decision to kind of decide we're talking about people who survived
Mm-hmm.
that first hour. They didn't bleed out, they didn't need an emergency, or they had somebody who did it, and then that person either had to move on or whatever. So I did allude a little bit to, hey, you might be caring for somebody that somebody else did an intervention on, and this is where you pick up.
Mm-hmm.
But I just had to acknowledge some people are going to die, and it is not my job to solve that problem for this book. But there's then that next wave of what people suffer from after traumatic injury. And that is, comes down to, can I keep them hydrated? Can I support their nutrition status so they can heal? Can I prevent or treat infection? And that's really, what this is about is, hey, I maybe couldn't do something for that first cohort that needed a surgeon, but now we're talking about a separate group of patients that, are probably going to survive, but they need support to do so. And so it focuses on that cohort of patients.
Yeah. And I think something like this kind of opens the door as far as, okay, like here's some after events, things you can do. If you're interested more, okay, there are things like Stop the Bleed program and other first aid educations out there, so that you can get more prepared, I guess, in that direction.
Yeah, you kind of
Absolutely.
mentioned it, and I hate bringing it up because it usually brings the podcast down, so to speak, as far as the tone. But you talked about the survival and palliative care and expectant casualty care. How did you kind of address those things?
Yeah, it in a 400-page book that I was trying to keep pretty small, there's a final chapter that talks about he some patients are going to die regardless of if you do everything right or wrong. Um but it, talks about keeping the patient comfortable and doing what you can, and then also making, hard decisions based on resources, right? But I think the more important piece of that is just, the conversation that occurs ahead of time. And also, opening the door to make sure that people understands, hey, caring in this environment is hard. It takes a toll on the individual. And so having some sort of plan to care for yourself as the care provider. So we did talk a lot about, hey, you need to think about what are your work cycles going to be? What are your rest cycles gonna be? If you can offload something to somebody else, consider doing that. And so, all that's early in the book to make sure people don't burn themselves out if they start at the beginning of the book and kinda get to the end. But I think that all ties into that, end of life care is, understanding I've got to take care of myself in this process, and we can fight death as much as we want, but sometimes it's inevitable. But I would have loved to spend more time on it. It just unfortunately is a very concise part of one of the chapters.
Yeah, true. No, it's good to address it though, because I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about it. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, in these types of situations, it's prevalent. When I was at Hurricane Katrina, it was everywhere. And if you had no training or no concept of what was going on, and no doctors and no EMS coming, that could be a pretty scary situation.
Yeah, and I hope by paging through the book, people will come across that. And we talk about, hey, if someone is deceased, what do I do with that body, and how do I deal with it respectfully? And we don't have all the details, but we open the door to the conversation of, think about that, and maybe identify what your local resources are, or what would I do if I don't have any resources to deal with this? And I think, that's a starting point at least to have the conversation.
Yeah, I think what we've seen too, and what just happened here in Western North Carolina less than a year ago, and they're still struggling out there. People were actually cut off for not just hours but days, and so there were different networks set up. You had people putting up their Starlink, but they're still cut off. They have what they had in their house. How do you think telemedicine uh, enables this concept that we're talking about?
Well, I think, let me put myself on the side of I'm the telemedicine provider. Somebody's calling me from rural North Carolina, completely cut off. If I know they have this book on their bookshelf, I can be like, okay, tell me, what are you dealing with? Let's just first start with that. And then, I could get them to the, to the book and say, hey, we're going to talk to you through some things, but you're only going to remember a small portion of what I tell you. So, go back to this reference and that'll help you as well. We're used to telemedicine where we're talking to somebody with medical training and we just need to give them, the trigger to go, oh, yeah, I remember that. It's buried in my head somewhere. I'll go do that. I know how to execute that. But telemedicine for a layperson you have to break that down into, here are the two things I want you to do next. And here's, and then you have to talk about how do you do that and help them, decision make it. But then there's going to be the what next. And it's like, hey, this is where you're at in the book. Here's what you can go back to. Remember, you have this resource. So they have a security blanket after you do the telemedicine. And I think there's, again, back to, there's a lot of products I would love to spin off of this. I would love to, so I have some folks that are looking at maybe making some video accompanying material so we can, show them in video, here's how you do this. So I think telemedicine can then help with that, of like, hey, here's some links to some useful things that are already curated specifically for this problem set.
Yeah, perfect. You think you'll be using some medical students for that as well?
They are enthusiastic participants, and I think they should be tapped into at every opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, is there a telecommunications section in that book?
So we have a communications chapter, and it
Okay.
actually does have, hey, here, when you call, these are things that you can have ready, so that the conversation will go well. So we do try and equip them to, get on the phone and have a meaningful dialogue.
Okay. Does it say like who to call? I mean, other than the hospital?
Yeah, so it has preparation there because that just varies so much by place. So it has kind of a, hey, think about this. Who would you call? Who's your local hospital? What's the alternative? Because if you're have suffered some sort of catastrophe, you might have to move on to whatever the next thing in the
Sure.
line is, and it does talk about, alternatives, and, again, setting up those communication channels ahead of time, which that requires the dialogue around the book, for people to understand. You can't just buy this, you actually have to participate with the book.
Right.
Yeah, and not just participate, but just what you alluded to is meeting people, getting together, practicing, training, potentially building those systems and networks where you know who to call, or you know what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. You could kind of learn all that stuff, especially if you're out there in the community. But yeah, you can't just sit in your basement with the book and wait for things to happen.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that because that's something, I grew up very small town, rural North Dakota. I remember my sister was in a car accident once. My parents threw her in the back of the truck and drove the 2 hours, you know, as a trauma patient, to like be seen. And so that was a normal concept to me. It was normal that you cared for your own until you could get them to, there was no EMS where I lived. And so, how do you start that conversation with people that are very used to having, something within a 5-minute response time to them? And I would hope someday that maybe we could introduce something like this into schools and community organizations, and it also provides an opportunity for people to come together for a good purpose. And the visionary in me kind of hopes that it will drive some sense of community and maybe engagement of people that wouldn't otherwise be engaged. And that's a big vision. I got a lot of marketing to do to make that happen, but you got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And once a crisis occurs, then people are actively looking for something, and you already have this. It exists. They can download the PDF. They can put it on their phone. Like you said before, we were talking before we started, the EPUB should be out soon. By the time this airs, there's going to be links. So these are things that you can have ready. You can have material ready. You can have networks of people ready. So I think this is a great way to start and dip your toe into those waters.
Yep. Um, I don't know what else. What else do we need to push out about this guide?
So, let's talk about like the technical details, just because it's helpful to keep people informed of the various ways it was intended. And I talked a little bit about the copyright all over. So the PDF, that will be on the website. that file is a print file. So you can take that to your local printer, and it's formatted in a 6x9 format to make it a little smaller so you can stuff it in a small bag or a very large pocket. And it's colored so that it's easy to find the chapters. All the chapters are different colors. So if you know, hey, I was in the blue chapter, I can quickly get back to the blue chapter. So printing this out and spiral binding it, yeah, and so thank you for holding it up.
Yeah.
That's how it's intended to be used. It should lay flat so you can look at directions while you're doing things. That was really the original vision for it. Um, in the EPUB, we can't maintain the same formatting, so it's a much, because you know how EPUBs modify to like a phone or an iPad or a computer, whatever size you're looking on. So it won't have that same color coding, but it's still, you can still do search terms and things like that. So it'll make it easy to find what you want. Um, the print version, we will eventually have that available so you can buy the actually bound version yourself so you don't have to print it yourself. That will be at cost, but the EPUB and the PDF are free. And like I said, share, give this to everybody. If you love somebody, give them this book, like give it to people for Christmas and, give it for birthdays and, 4th of July, please, like, go through your email distro list and give it to anybody you love and go, I just want to share this because it might make a difference someday.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I don't know if I have a bunch of other questions. I think you answered most of my questions. Did you have anything else, Dennis?
No, I guess I didn't. I think the most fundamentally important parts, like one, it exists. I guess where do we know where it's going to hang even before we have the link for it?
Yeah, so we are self-publishing through a publishing company called Lulu, and I'll provide links for that when we get it out. It So we are hanging the PDF on some of the USIS websites, and so I can provide the links where we're trying to hang it in multiple places and redirect people back. So I can provide those links as well. Um, Anybody that has a platform that wants to hang it and link it, the copyright is such that you can do that. And so you can either provide a link to our link or, take the PDF and upload it yourself and share it. That is perfectly allowable under the copyright. So lots of different ways to get to it.
Yeah, I've seen you putting it out everywhere that you possibly can already. So we'll be sure to put it on prolongedfieldcare.org as well.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. I mean, personally, I'm good.
Perfect. Yeah, that was a great interview. We really appreciate it, Missy. Thanks for all your support, not just in this book, I mean, but for the past 10 years. I know I was one of those E6s in Africa trying to figure out prolonged care while you were up there at SOC Africa, I believe, at the same time. So, yeah, it's just weird how all these things come together and we keep on pushing, and people like you keep on pushing these things that are so valuable, not just in the military, but now worldwide. And we really do appreciate all your work on this. I know working on even just CPGs and chapters, like writing a book, is a huge undertaking. If anybody's never done it, just give a huge thanks to Missy Givens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, can I have to like add this in at the end because it's really important to me. Like my work has always been how do I leave the world a better place for my kids, and that's in the forward of the book. And I just encourage anybody who's listening, and if you're listening, you're probably already one of these people, right? Of like and you can't do that alone. I'm so grateful for a lot of these connections that grew actually out of, the hard problems I had when I was a SOCAF surgeon of I needed this network to be able to solve those problems. And it's paid dividends, a billion times over. I mean, the work I've done is so insignificant compared to the solutions that the collective has done. And so, make friends, build networks, be a part of your community, and, leave the world a better place. that's just how I would close this out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a perfect closing. Thanks so
That's
much.
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this MSIW program, and we hope that you will both participate and contribute to the notes or offer thoughts, requests, and suggestions via our email link. The best to you, your work, and the relationships and security this effort strives to impact.